No one wakes up in the morning and go, today, what I'm really looking for is a legal document. For incumbents, when technology changes and there's an opportunity for them to change their business model, inevitably they don't, and they enable a new breed of companies to ultimately take away their business. We've got 50,000 startups on SeedLegals in the UK. I think the majority of all early stage startups are on SeedLegals in the UK.
You have been described as the man who saved the BBC.
When I arrived, the state of iPlayer was not great. Pretty much nothing worked well.
At that time, no one would have believed how it was going to change.
I was personally in New York at the time, in the early 2000s, talking to music label executives, and instead of doing a licensing deal, that became Exhibit A when they sued us.
Welcome to Without Limitation. This is the podcast where we meet the people who are reshaping the legal industry. Now, talking about reshaping industries, my guest today has been involved in reshaping not just the legal industry, but multiple other industries. Anthony Rose is the founder of SeedLegals, which we'll come on to. But before that, he was involved in the launch of BBC iPlayer, the media streaming service from the UK's national broadcaster. And he's described by Wired magazine as the man who saved the BBC. Before that, he was leading technology at Kazaa, which in the early days of the internet was the #1 music file sharing platform. And across each stage of this journey, Anthony has been personally involved in the disruption that has been happening. And unsurprisingly, he's got some really interesting views on whether incumbents are able to change and how they might go about doing so, as well as the opportunities for new entrants to come in and take market share. So what of SeedLegals? Well, SeedLegals is a really interesting platform aimed at startups, and right now it accounts for most of the seed rounds that are happening in the UK, and they've recently launched in the US. It's a really interesting conversation. It's very rare you get the opportunity to speak to someone who's been involved in just so much disruption across so many industries. I really enjoyed it, and I think you'll find it super useful and super practical. So without further ado, let's get into it. Here's my conversation with Anthony Rose, the founder of SeedLegals. Anthony, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Matt.
Well, we were just discussing before we came on, you have had a super interesting journey, and you're probably not what most people would consider the archetype of a legal or a legal technology founder. So I would love to just get into some of your story. And in particular, I was reading that even as a teenager, Anthony, you were an entrepreneur. And I think you walked into an Apple store and you closed your first sale was in an Apple store as a teenager. So we'd just love to hear that story just to kick things off.
So I've been around a little while. As when I was a kid, I used to make circuit boards and even had a robot pick and place machine and a hot belt surface mount reflow machine. Basically large machines for making and soldering circuit boards and so on, and all the components on them in my study when I was a teenager. And it kind of started as a hobby, of course, as a kid in the local computer club. And I'd make circuit boards. And then one day I took it into my local Apple store in the days of Apple II. I was living in Cape Town then, and there was an American entrepreneur running it. And he said, "That's great. We'll take 20. I said, "I'm sorry, you want to buy them?" And so suddenly I figured there's a market for things. And so I literally sat on the kitchen floor with my brother and sister and mother and put these final bits into boxes and sold them. And then the next time I had an idea, it was now with a slightly more commercial intent. Anyway, I built a hardware business. It was great. We're living in South Africa, but I was studying engineering when at the point we left. And I'd look up at the University of Cape Town on the hill and see tear gas coming out. It's like, okay, we need to move on. So we moved to Australia. I built my hardware business. That morphed into real-time 3D graphics and built a real-time 3D engine. That morphed into Kazaa, the music file sharing company. And I went to many media conferences and so on and met Eric Huggers, who was at Microsoft at the time. He was later hired by the BBC. Anyway, one day he called me and said, "How would you like to join the BBC?" I was living in Australia. And I went, the BBC, where are the stock options? But I was persuaded, moved to the UK in 2007 to take on iPlayer. And anyway, after the BBC, I built startup, got back to startup roots, sold it, built another one, sold it, invested in a few, got tired of paying lawyers, and then met my co-founder, ex-VC and serial angel investor, Laurent, and built SeedLegals so that other startup founders don't need to go to lawyers. This was in the days before AI, but we'll get to that part shortly.
Yeah, it's such an interesting journey. And I'm listening to that and hearing what you were doing with the hardware and thinking my 8-year-old has just got into Raspberry Pi. And now I'm thinking, right, how are we going to turn this into revenue? You know, it's nice that he's exploring this, but he needs to be out there in the market, shopping these things around. But clearly, you know, an entrepreneur from an early age, right? That's the absolute archetype of an entrepreneur. And you've covered a lot of ground there. You talked about Kazaa, and I think that's, you know, really interesting chapter. And for those who don't know Kazaa and maybe don't remember it, it was a music file sharing service, kind of early days of the internet. And obviously at the time, you probably spent a fair bit of time in and around lawyers because it was controversial, right? File sharing was controversial and the record labels were desperately hanging on to their business models and things. So, you know, was that really your first exposure to the world of legal?
Pretty much so. The Kazaa, it was peer-to-peer file sharing, so people would upload onto distributed servers any files they wanted to share, kind of like an alternate distributed version of the internet. Some of the files might be owned by other people, and that was the problem. Really, but the macro problem was it was in the days of CD sales. And CD sales were a $10 billion a year business, but declining by $1 billion a year because of the rise of the internet. And there's a general lesson here, which is that for incumbents, when technology changes and there's an opportunity for them to change their business model, inevitably they don't, and they enable a new breed of companies to ultimately take away their business. And I've seen this now in my professional career 3 times. The first was with music. And so Kazaa, Napster, iMesh, and others took off. Later on, Spotify and so on came along. We built a licensed music store. I was personally in New York at the time in the early 2000s talking to music label executives saying, you know, in the time it takes to read this PowerPoint, 100,000 of your tracks have been downloaded, you could have monetized them. And instead of doing a licensing deal, that became Exhibit A when they sued us. And so when you have, it was quite interesting because the music company was, sales were decreasing by $1 billion a year. Here were some people going, the internet is the new thing. You can reinvent your business on the internet. And instead of them embracing it, they said, let's try and spend $100 million a year suing you all out of existence. But of course, cut to some years later, nobody buys CDs or records. 90 whatever % of all their revenue is from internet streaming. So change and technology is inevitable. And my second foray in that was, you know, with BBC and iPlayer and beyond, where the BBC was prescient. They said, the things we made for telly yesterday, you can watch today on your phone, computer, wherever, whenever. It was forward thinking. It was genius. But what they didn't do is take the next step. And the next step is to redefine the content itself. And this I could see ending badly because you talk to the BBC R&D team, you talk to the BBC programmers, and they would deride the new type of content. What is the new type of content? Kids on skateboards on YouTube. It was even in the days before Facebook video. It's like, it's only kids, the quality's rubbish, the internet buffers, you know, we're working on 4K high def, but it's the same Attenborough stuff. I mean, that was at the high point, but the same, you know, Antique Roadshow or other things. So basically, they made the same stuff as before and did a great job redefining distribution, but not redefining content, and opened the door for the Twitches and the YouTubes and the TikToks and others. And to the point that, you know, Netflix's, you know, budget dwarfs the BBC's entire budget. So the failure to adapt program making, I think, is a key part of the demise of broadcasters. And the third foray is, of course, with SeedLegals and legal. And law firms charge a hefty amount by the hour. we were the first really to have automation. So you go into a platform and you specify your deal terms. There's data to show you what's market standard. Instead of going to a lawyer who would give you 200 pages of documents for a funding round and you try to understand what on earth it meant, you are now empowered with data and, plain English questions, what investor rights should be gotten and who's on the board and so on. And then the computer builds the documents. There's a workflow. It integrates with Companies House. It's all e-signed. There's a 24/7 platform. There's web chat where people answer in 5 minutes with no billing by the hour. And so we carved out a part in a small vertical around fundraising. But of course, the legal space is hugely wide, right? Everything from divorces, taxes, litigation, and beyond. And for 10 years, there was, like SeedLegals in a narrow fundraising space, but the rest of the world was unchanged. And then came AI. And of course, that is the existential threat for lawyers. And I wonder, in the same way that the record industry execs went, no, it's just this internet stuff's no good, CD sales, and the broadcaster said, no, people's going to still want the same program. They're coming to our TV channel or website. In the same way, lawyers are going, no, they're still going to want the human and they're still going to want the billable hour. I think history repeats itself. And then the question is, we see all law firms have an innovation department and so on. The question is there a fundamental change? Obviously, the problem is, and this was a problem when I, as SeedLegals founder, went to talk to law firms and said, have I got a great platform offering for you? When you could bill clients 50 hours, you can now bill them 10 hours. They would go, sorry, remind me why we're having this meeting. It's not very valuable because we charge by the hour. So we're going to see in a set of narrow spaces, AI and new legal platforms completely owning these new spaces. Initially, they'll be in fairly well-defined, not just fundraising, but, family law and certain corporate things and fund administration and many things. But slowly, these will increase. So we're going to see a lot of change coming very quickly.
Yeah, and what you've described there is that classic innovator's dilemma thing, isn't it? The Clayton Christensen. And, it's so interesting that you bring that perspective, having seen that firsthand in another industry, the music industry. At that time, no one would have believed how it was going to change. The idea that you would have a subscription, all you can eat streaming service for your music would have been absolutely unthinkable. And the incumbents were far too successful and far too profitable to change.
That's
and
right.
Here we are in 2026.
The revenue needed to decrease to force change. Well, the revenue's good. Nobody wants to change, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And are we, as you say, at that moment in law? And of course, law is such a big industry, as you've alluded to, there's the stuff that startups do, the legal work for startups, there's divorce, there's real estate, there's big ticket M&A. And I don't think it will be evenly distributed, the impact of it, at least not overnight. But clearly there are some categories where it's going to be disrupted. And to your point, it's a hard sell for a lawyer sitting in a law firm to be told, look, you're billing 50 hours, now it's going to be 10. But on the flip side, maybe there's more scale there. Maybe you can do more, you can reach a broader audience than you've ever reached before, and it's a volume play. But yeah, really interesting. And we could probably spend the rest of the conversation on that alone. I do want to put the spotlight on SeedLegals in a minute and get into what you're doing, because I think you were one of the first movers in this space. Just really quickly on the BBC stuff, because full disclosure, I was at the BBC for a year or so across a couple of roles as a trainee, and I'm very, very fond of it. But you have been described as the man who saved the BBC. There's a famous Wired article, I think 2009-ish. And you told the story of how you got involved, but why were you the man who saved the BBC? What specifically did you do? And I think there's some really interesting cultural change stuff that you brought in when you first started there on the iPlayer project.
Great question. So, I got hired to head up iPlayer and take it from pre-launch to launch. Now, the BBC, it wasn't my idea. The BBC had been noodling on iPlayer for years. I keep meeting these very nice people at conferences telling me and doing papers and presentations on this new video player thing. But they'd never productized it. They'd never made a consumer-friendly thing. And so when I arrived, the state of iPlayer was not great. pretty much nothing worked well. Nothing worked as a consumer proposition. And my first thought, well, I mean, you're hired, you get off the plane, you have to fix this problem. You're told in front of everyone it launches in 3 months. Failure is not an option. And so I thought, where is the problem? My initial thought is that I had to have to fire the entire tech team because the tech was not good. And then I realized after talking to people and researching things that actually the tech team was brilliant. The problem was, as a company, they had been pulling the tech team in every direction, none of which aligned to consumer success. So, for example, the BBC as a whole did not want a BBC iPlayer. BBC One wanted a BBC One player, and BBC Two wanted a BBC Two player. They had been forced together in an uneasy alliance. But they were all pulling to get more channel branding and so on, and the poor consumer was being pulled in different ways. No, clearly there's going to be the disassociation of channels. You just want to see programs around themes, around your favorites, around what's new. It didn't matter what channel was on telly last night. So that was attention. And then the distribution department wanted to save money on distribution because it was the internet, but broadcast was free. So they had a really low quality peer-to-peer system, which was not good at all. And then the moderation team wanted to check programs and vet them, but then it would be like the next day only it would be live. So I realized that what I had to do was be the customer champion, and every single decision had to be, what would the customer want? Who is the customer? Who's the viewer? And then I developed what I call Anthony's famous chocolate box test, which is
the Lindt chocolate test.
The Lindt chocolate test,
yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So I realized I'd need to do consumer testing, customer testing of the product, because every time I raised an issue, the developers would go, no, it's just you. It's only your computer. No, you're the only one working on that program. No, you're the only one using the Microsoft browser and so on. And I wanted to have actual customer feedback. So I went around and said, who does user testing? And I found the department that does user testing. And they said they want £20,000 in 6 weeks for user testing. I went, that doesn't work. I'll launch in 3 months and I'm not spending £20,000. So instead, I went to the local supermarket, bought some big boxes of Lindt chocolate, and then figured out I would go find some non-technical people, usually the legal team. And I went up to level 5 and said, I will give you this fine box of chocolates if you come down and test my product. And so I gather the developers around, big screen TV, and say, sit down, what program is your favorite? Great, find it. And the first time was a complete disaster. Everything went wrong. And then I said to the team afterwards, we're going to pick the 5 most important things, and in 48 hours, we're going to fix them. And then we're going to repeat. It took us a bit more than 48 hours. Maybe we fixed the 3 of them, repeated the test. By the 3rd time we did it, it was awesome. The person said, I like EastEnders. Oh, there it is on the homepage. Click play. So it was all about customer-driven development. Now, for those founders and tech people watching or listening to this, everyone knows these days about Lean Startup, the Eric Ries books, Move Fast, Break Things, the whole ton of literature, but none of that was around in 2007. So naively, I kind of made this up as I went along. And I'm delighted that in retrospect, it aligns very much with, customer-driven development, which I'm insistent on at SeedLegals. You always start with the voice of the customer. And anytime you're doing something that does not align with what the customer wants, sometimes there are strategic or pricing or other reasons why it can't. Otherwise, the price would be 0. But you have to think very hard about it. So when I see incumbents, whether they be broadcasters or law firms or rights holders or whatever it is, coming up with models that do not align with the consumer need, you're just thinking there is the next startup disruption opportunity right there.
Yeah. It's so funny you mentioned the some of that user testing you did at the BBC, and it was often the legal department who got roped into it, albeit in return for chocolate, because it was considered that they were the least technical audience and the furthest removed from UI, UX and product and marketing and that sort of stuff. So I did a couple of those tests actually. I think I did them after you'd done your initiative for the BBC Sport website. And sadly, they didn't give me any Lindt chocolate, so I need to go back to them on that. But it's funny that the lawyers were the ones who were the guinea pigs for some of the early days of iPlayer. But what I think is really interesting is you took that customer driven or, user centric thinking, right? And I think I read a story where early in your role there, you sat down and had your assistant try and find a show that she liked because no one believed you that it was too convoluted, the user experience. And you said, look, find a show that you want. And she tried to find the Jonathan Ross show or EastEnders or whatever it was. And she just couldn't find it. And when she found it, it didn't have any of the description of who were the guests on the show. And what I think is interesting is that seems like the common thread that runs through a lot of your startups is starting from the user. And clearly, bringing us up to the current day with SeedLegals, it looks to me like you redesigned the funding round experience around the founder as opposed to here are some documents, go figure out what to do with them. That wasn't really their job to be done. Their job to be done was, I want some money, please, from some angel investors or some VCs or whatever. And that's where you started. So am I looking at that the right way? That's really the common theme that's run through almost everything you've done in the last 10, 20 years.
Yes, it's a great point. I think when we started SeedLegals, our perception was the problem to solve is the more efficient generation of legal documents. But I've realized a lot since then. So no one wakes up in the morning and go, today, what I'm really looking for is a legal document. What they go is, today, I need to get investment, or I need to hire somebody, or I need to complete this licensing deal or something. And the way to do that includes a legal document, but it also includes plain English advice on what makes sense. What are the standard deal terms? And when it comes to startups, well, let me tell you very quickly about SeedLegals. So, we're a 150-person company based in the UK, expanding to the US. These days, I spend 2 weeks in New York and 2 weeks in London each month. I happen to be in New York today. And the goal is to be the one-stop platform for founders to grow their business, get investment, and scale beyond that. So what I've realized is the base level, if you know Maslow's hierarchy of needs, sort of the base level might be a legal contract. But in order to get the legal contract, your customers, in the case of startup founders, need to have investors. And in order to have investors, they need to be able to describe their product's idea. And so what's really interesting is with SeedLegals, what I've discovered is what founders really want, and this is a lesson for all law firms, is they want empowerment. Empowerment is ultimately the deliverable value. What does empowerment means? It means you can go on the platform 24/7 on a rainy Sunday. If you find an investor, you can go on the platform and 5 minutes later have your investment agreement. Empowerment means there's no clock, ticking by the minute or hour on billing. It means that there's a web chat and an AI service. It means there's data. So you're not the only schmuck in the room, not wanting to give this deal term, or the only schmuck giving the deal term. And it means that when you want to do something, within minutes, you're enabled to do this. Now, this is not a SeedLegals sales spiel. This is for anyone building a product. I think it's all about empowerment. And if you can show your customer that they rule the world by using your products, that is a winner. Now, the other thing I found at SeedLegals is customers couldn't raise investment if they couldn't describe the value of the product they're building, principally to investors. And so even though I've got a platform that builds efficiently all the legal documents, actually most of my time personally these days goes into doing workshops, webinars, in-person events on the art of the pitch, how to create a great pitch deck, how to pitch to investors, how to create a website, which you can vibe code these days. Because the number one problem I see with startup founders is they will tell you passionately over dinner what they do. So, or the problem I should say they solve. So we meet over dinner and I go, insurance is broken. You're paying at least 50% too much for your home insurance. It's insane. I'm working on a new AI thing to cut your insurance bills by 30%. Takes you 5 minutes to sign up. At the end of which you're going, this is awesome. Where do I go? And then you go to the website and the website says, using blockchain and AI to revolutionize insurance with pictures of swirly atoms and an AI brain. And you go, I have absolutely no idea what you do. I've fallen asleep already. I'm out of here. So a lot of what I do is showing founders the art of storytelling, how to get investors to invest in you, customers to buy into what you're doing, and team members to leave their day job and come and join you. So I love to think of it as a sort of pyramid of you thought you needed X. We can deliver X, but what you really wanted is the steps above it. That's not my real business, but hey, if I can solve it in a scalable way with podcasts, with videos, with webinars, and discussing it like this to help founders, in my case, understand and solve the real problems to grow their businesses.
And what I think is interesting is that, you describing what you're personally doing and talking to startups, but I also saw on the SeedLegals website, you guys have a template pitch deck and you have playbooks for founders who are trying to raise money. And to me, that goes back to the point of what is the user's job to be done. And it's not, I want some documents. It's, I want to go raise some money. And when you define it that way, you end up as a company doing things that are not just generating legal documents, but helping people with that job. On the vibe coding piece, I'm a big fan of vibe coding. I've got a bad habit of buying domain names. I bought vibecode.law. And for those who listen to the podcast, we've got a platform there with, which showcases what folks in the legal industry have been building. But I do think for anyone launching a startup, a great place to start is just vibe code the marketing page. It's like the cheapest thing to do, right? You just get that out there, get that in front of some users and see what the reaction is. And it's usually left to the last thing after you've spent loads of time and money actually building the product. But you can just start with the marketing page. And I always recommend that as a place to start. There's a really good...
Can I hop in there? Because this is a favorite passion topic of mine. And it starts like this, which is fundraising and building a startup has changed fundamentally over the last even 18 months. So once upon a time, you'd raise investment to build your product because the only way to build a product was hire developers, and developers are expensive and they take a long time to build it. And then AI enhanced developer tools like Claude Code came out and Lovable for building websites. The fundraising has changed significantly. Astute investors no longer want to fund you to build the products. They want you to build it on your own dime because everyone can now build. There's been an explosion in the number of apps. The number of apps in the App Store submissions have doubled in the last 18 months because it's now so much easier to build. So building something does not make it investable, and investors are not going to give you money to build it. I mean, if you're doing nuclear power or genetic sequencing, yes, but a software product, no. And so you have to build it yourself. How are you going to build it? Well, the starting point is to create just a web page. Now, once upon a time, to do that, you also had to hire designers and so on. It was complicated, but now you can use, for those who don't know it, there's a wonderful website called lovable.dev. And you basically tell it in plain English what you want. And if you get your prompt right, you'll get the most amazing website in less time than it takes your Italian coffee machine to warm up. So you can go to Lovable and say, make a website for my, home insurance product. The tagline is, save 50% on your insurance in the next 5 minutes. Include 3 examples of a small flat owner, larger flat owner, and a big homeowner saving a, thing. Include a pricing page. Use rich lifestyle graphics of people using the app. Anyway, 10 minutes later, you're going to have an awesome website, which means that if you have an idea, the very first thing you should do is just spend 10 minutes making a web page for it. And then go take your phone or, send somebody the link and say, tell me what this app does. Don't say, isn't this an awesome idea? Because people go, embarrassed you. Yeah, it's awesome. And then you build it and give up years of your life and no one wants it. So ask people, what does it do? How much would you pay for it? So everything about building startups these days is about creating a mock-up in almost no time, testing it, and then if you have people loving it and wanting it, then take it from there.
Yeah, it's great advice. And just to riff on that quickly, there's a guy called Anthony Pieri, I'll try and put it in the show notes, who does marketing page takedowns, where he looks at a marketing page and tries to figure out what the hell this company does. And to your point, often it's very abstract and it's hard to figure out what the company does. And he proposes some rewrites. So what I've started doing, weekend projects and things and recommending founders to do is just prompt Lovable or Claude or Replit to do an Anthony Pieri takedown of what I've created. And often it'll repurpose it and rewrite your H1, your call to action and all of that on the marketing page. But I do think it is a great example of how to build stuff these days. And actually the mindset that's needed, which is, I don't know if this is going to be right or wrong. And I think as a founder, you've got to treat it as an experiment. Everything you ship is a hypothesis. And lawyers actually are not great at that because we're used to being right all the time. We're used to being the person in the room who everyone turns to and says, what is the legal position on this? And you need to affirmatively say, it's this or it's that. But when you come to found a startup, you have to go into it as, I think this feature might be useful, but I don't know. And that's a big change for lawyers.
Can I hop in with a quick top tip? If you're a lawyer and you're watching or listening to this, here's an idea. You almost certainly have an idea for using technology or AI to improve something that you're doing. And here's the beauty of things like Lovable. They democratize the ability to build something. So imagine that, you're doing some aspect of legal and there's something that is taking your time or boring or some new idea you've got. You probably had no idea of the path to be able to articulate and demo and show people and get buy-in for it. But now you can. So you just go to Lovable and you can design a page. It may even be functional. It may even do what you want in a few minutes without being technical. So you can get to your colleagues on a Monday morning and go, the thing we've been talking about? I built it over the weekend. Here it is. And this is, I think, a great way to, at least in a modern forward-thinking firm, to get buy-in for things because you cross the gap between arm waving. This is a fantastic, and everyone goes, dude, can't imagine what it is. Too hard to, I built it. Okay, it's not the production version and the client data wouldn't be safe and so on, but you can now see enough of it that we can test it. And then you can go around to your colleagues and maybe even for the cost of a box of Lindt chocolates, you can get them to test it.
It's such an exciting time to be building stuff. Let's talk a little bit more about SeedLegals, Anthony. And you mentioned you're 2 weeks in the US, 2 weeks in the UK. Share a bit more about what you're doing. I read that you're there to help US startups, but also I think there to help UK startups who are looking to launch and scale into the US. So talk a bit more about what you guys are up to in the US.
Right. So the primary goal in the US is, we've got 50,000 startups on SeedLegals in the UK. I think the majority of all early stage startups are on SeedLegals in the UK, which is awesome. If you're not on SeedLegals, you should be there. Now, but of course, for growing our company, that puts a, ceiling on it. So we can grow into adjacent areas, but also other countries. And so, the US is like 8 times the size. There's huge amounts of money available. Can we tap into that market? Can we run the same playbook or a different playbook that worked in the UK in the US? Now, it's a little different. In the UK, the legal system is beautifully reformed. You can practice law without being an SRA regulated law firm, other than a few areas. In the US, you can't. The US has got other competitors. And people have been going to lawyers in a way that they don't in the UK. So the playbook isn't the same, but should we give it a go? So anyway, one of the common mistakes founders make, it's said when they expand in the US, is they hire a very expensive marketing person, and US salaries are insane, and give them large amounts of money. And then it turns out the only thing they can market is themselves. So that ends badly. So instead, the CEO should get his or her butt on a plane and go to the US. So I chose New York. It's 5 hours time zone difference. It's 7 hours flight. I love New York. It's got the most amazing startup community, and I can literally run up and down Manhattan to meetings, which I very much like. So I now spend time here understanding what US founders, what US investors want, and looking to build and adapt our product for that. So one of the interesting things is as an outsider. So this is a really interesting thing. So I'm not a lawyer by background. And initially I was hugely embarrassed when people said, SeedLegals, are you a lawyer? But no, I think it's actually a positive because it takes often an outsider to think things differently. Had Elon Musk come from General Motors, Tesla would be a car with a diesel engine or a petrol engine and a bolt-on electric motor and look a bit like a Chevy, as opposed to being rethought. And so I like to think, apart from me being a tech person, not a lawyer, I'm now an Englishman in New York coming with, hang on, why do you do things differently? The fact you do things differently could be good, or it could be an opportunity. And so one of the interesting opportunities that I've found in the US, which is our next, and I hope, huge breakout product launch, which we call a safer. So let me spend a few moments because it's really interesting. So in the US, lawyers charge a fortune. I mean, $1,000 an hour is not uncommon. It costs $50,000 to $100,000 to do a funding round. It's insane. I mean, in the UK, £2,000 or £3,000. So what happens in the US is 13 years ago, Y Combinator, the hugely well-known accelerator, came out with something called a SAFE. A SAFE is like an IOU. It says, forget all these complicated, expensive lawyers. And a SAFE means I'm going to give you money and you promise to give me shares later when you do a big funding round. And so the US is bifurcated into, I'm raising a Series A, which means millions, and I'll spend hundreds of thousands or 50,000 on lawyers. But until then, I'm going to download these free documents on the internet to avoid the whole lawyer thing completely. So it's really interesting. In the UK, the download free stuff from the internet doesn't really exist because they're low-cost platforms like SeedLegals, where you get a great result with humans to help you and professionally curated documents and a workflow and data and so on. But the US is bifurcated. And so my thought is there space for the SeedLegals playbook, which is partway between I'm going to download stuff from the internet, I'm going to pay a fortune. But it's hard to compete with free. And it's really interesting. Everyone will tell you in the US, no, you need a lawyer. And then they proceed to download stuff, not know. And I discovered founders in the US make far more mistakes. They incorporate the wrong company type. They don't have what's called an A/B tax selection, which can cost you a big time. They don't understand the tax benefits for investors. So that seems to be our opportunity. So we've invented something called the safer. Our contention is safes are not safe. Why? If you're in the UK, you would know that the early stage UK startup ecosystem runs on SEIS and EIS tax benefits. So one of the major advantages of the UK ecosystem, fantastic government tax benefits for investors. You can deduct 50% of your investment from your income tax. It's awesome. And you pay no capital gains tax if you keep your shares for 3 years. In the US, there's something sort of equivalent called QSBS, which surprisingly, not everyone knows about. But interestingly, if you keep your shares for 5 years from when the stock is issued, then you pay no federal capital gains tax up to a certain level. Weirdly, the IRS has not ruled whether this 5-year clock starts from when you enter into a safe or when the safe converts later. No one seems to care. They some take a conservative view, some take an aggressive view and see if the IRS comes to claw the money back later. So anyway, we've invented the safer. Our contention is safes are not safe. There's a better way of doing it. And instead of kicking the can down the road, as YC have done, saying, we're not a law firm, we're not a legal tech company, we're going to give you an IOU. My solution is we can productize the proper issuing of stock so that it's super easy, super inexpensive, so you can get a better solution than, the promissory note. Anyway, that launches very shortly, and we are super excited about it.
Really interesting. Safer with an R on the end.
Exactly.
Okay.
I love coming up with nice marketing names.
What does the competitive landscape look like for you guys? You mentioned there are the free services. You've mentioned law firms. There are also these AI native law firms launching. And just as an observer, it seems to me that the line between what is a law firm and what is a tech company is starting to blur a little bit.
So, the existential thing is, if you don't disrupt yourself, then you're going to be out of a business. And that goes back to exactly what we were talking earlier about the music companies and the broadcasters. If you don't reinvent yourself, you're dead in the long term. And so for years, the competition was some somewhat similar platforms and companies doing cap tables, but we really had a well-defined niche, or as investors say, a moat of platform that our customers love, a great team, great tech solution, widespread market adoption. But of course, AI comes along. We think that we're not hearing from our customers that we're going to do a funding round on ChatGPT, because there's a big difference between make a document and do everything I need for a funding round, including the cap table and signatures and everything else. If we're complacent, we're dead. So how do we reinvent ourselves? And as you say, what's really interesting is all the new legal tech companies, many of them are creating AI for law firms, but there are also a growing number of consumer-facing ones, often in the blending AI and a lawyer together. So the AI will make a first pass of the document and then somebody will review it if you want. But what's going to happen inevitably, and this is the same thing that happened to broadcasters and to lawyers, is consumers will redefine what success is. So success in the case of broadcasters, they thought that it was a super high definition 30-minute program, and anything that was low resolution or badly filmed is junk and no one wants it. But it's the opposite. People want spontaneity. They want to be able to film themselves. In fact, often the poorer quality, more genuine content performs better than the super high res, professionally curated or filmed content. And likewise, if you define success for a person looking for a contract as a solution to a problem, it's speed, it's cost, it's getting 90% of the way there in 10% of the effort, because in many cases, sufficiently good is good enough. And you don't need more. Why spend £700 on a contract to hire a consultant when, for £3 or no pounds, you can get it in 5 minutes. So the world is changing rapidly, and what people thought they had to do, they will no longer think they need to do. And if you're in one of the older services only doing it that way, you're going to be dead. So again, law is a wide area, and 2/3 of people watching this going, dude, he's so naive. But for a growing set of areas, which will, like a cancer, eat into everything else, success is being redefined. So how do we adapt to it? Well, we need to reinvent ourselves as an AI company. I mean, we've always automated things, so it's not dissimilar in a sense, but we've got a whole range of AI initiatives, from our internal customer support team using AI and our dev team using AI so we can be more efficient internally. Then we've got tools for users. So for example, if you are applying for these SEIS or EIS tax benefits, you usually need to do something called advance assurance. You can do it on the HMRC website for free, but there's only a 67% success rate. Or you can do it on SeedLegals, and we charge for it, with a 99% success rate. And 60% of all of them in the world are done through SeedLegals. And our team have a 48-point checklist to go through. So obviously that takes time. So we've made an AI system now that gives real-time interactive feedback trained on the thousands, tens of thousands of these applications that we've done. So there we can use our data that we've got that no one else has to be able to train AI, not in a way that uses outside of our platform, to do something. And then the next thing is to connect it with AI. So we've just launched an MCP server. For those who are not geeky, what that means is you can connect and you get all the benefits of the SeedLegals platform, but within Claude or ChatGPT. So you can do things like, hey, Claude, here's a list of 20 investors. Please create safes or seed fasts, send them to each of the investors with these deal terms, and notify me when they've signed. I mean, how cool is that?
So are we entering the era of vibe raising then? So I'm in Lovable, or I'm in Claude, and I've made the marketing website. Then I've made the pitch deck. I've got a project in Claude. Then I go to SeedLegals and I vibe create the legal documents. I wonder how far that goes. And there was a thing recently, I think it was Cloudflare, have introduced which is a company that runs some of the infrastructure for the internet. And they're now charging agents for micro interactions with websites. So, your agent goes to a particular site, pulls some content, and the agent pays a micro fee for it. I wonder if, and maybe this is a question, what does the funding round look like in 2036? Is it agents working with agents? Yeah. What's your vision for that, to the extent any of us can predict what the world will look like?
Well, let's, guessing more than 2 or 3 years out is a mug's game, because no one can predict anything further than that. But I would think something like this, which is, if you're an investor, your agent is going to be scouring the websites and the internet, looking for hot deals. Maybe it'll be out there looking for tweets about things. And then it will be perhaps reaching out to the founders or analyzing their website and telling you interesting investments. And in the morning, every time you wake up, it'll go, hey, I found 3 interesting investments, and then you might set a limit. I'm going to spend up to £500 or $5,000 or $100,000, however wealthy you are, on speculative ones. So maybe you'll give it a budget, and it will say, I'm going to make investment proposals for you. For founders, they're going to be agentic incomings. Instead of having to take investor meetings, the agent will be assessing your pitch and your deck. You may still create a video pitch, but it's not going to be watched by a human. AI will grade it. We already see that, and AI will grade your pitch deck. And my agent as a founder will connect to your agent as an investor and, take care of the deal, and I'll just see money arriving in my bank account. Likewise, probably the agent will be monitoring my company's performance and maybe topping up my funding round based on performance, or pulling out if it's not performing. So, of course, that's, you can already see much of that happening. And we already have AI pitch deck feedback on SeedLegals, and there are apps already I see where, for example, you record a pitch and the AI grades it. And there's also now an AI investor who will act and trained on real investors, and you can pitch to the video avatar of a VC who will give you feedback. Now, at the moment, it's giving you feedback, but obviously the next thing is, if they like it, they're going to invest. So, but more generally, you would expect that, while you're sleeping, your 26 agents are out there doing stuff on your behalf. Now, I was thrust into this either Elysian or dystopian future. One of my SeedLegals customers made a virtual Anthony. So they ingested the hundreds of articles and videos that I've created for the knowledge base, and then they cloned my voice using, I think, 11 labs. And then they created this chatbot where you talk to it, and then it answers with my voice. The voice is uncanny. It mimics my nuances, pauses, tone of voice. It's unbelievable. And so you can ask it anything about fundraising, and based on the things I've written, it will answer. And it's a bit uncanny, because on the one hand, it's amazing, but on the other hand, it's not quite right. So anyway, I thought this was amazing. So I posted on LinkedIn and had thousands of views. But then something interesting happened. People started writing to me going, hey, I asked virtual Anthony a question and I didn't quite like the answer. So can I ask you instead? And then I thought, I'm now embarrassed for my AI double, but I shouldn't be embarrassed. It's not me, and I never built it, but people perceive it as me. So imagine in the future, you've got all these AI agents which are mimicking you, answering your emails, doing outreach, maybe calling literally there are startups that will call, your elderly parents on a daily basis, mimicking your voice so that you don't need to call them. It's either genius or insanity. I'm not sure which. So I love this idea of this agentic thing. While I sleep or I'm on the beach, my agents are doing all sorts of things, but will I be responsible for my agents, or will I be embarrassed about my agents? And who's responsible from the legal perspective when my agents go and buy stuff or libel somebody? This I don't know.
Well, I hope that we're speaking to the real Anthony. Well, I look forward to the LinkedIn post in a couple of weeks where you're like, I tricked Matt. We've just done I couldn't be bothered with the podcast, so I sent my agent along. But Anthony, I'm conscious that we're out of time, but just a huge thank you. It's so rare to have someone who has been at the forefront of, I think, transformation, not just of one industry, but multiple industries. And I think you bring such a unique perspective from all of that. So big thank you. Best of luck with the US launch and the safer stuff and the MCP. And yeah, can't wait to see what you guys are building next.
All right. Thank you so much, Matt.
Thanks
I've
for your
enjoyed
time.
this greatly, as you probably noticed. Okay.